Hello and welcome to this episode of Writing and Talking, or Talking About Writing, or whatever this unnamed but perhaps will be named podcast one day is. It's myself, Matthew Fox, my co-host, friend, guest, uh, all those sorts of things, except not a guest, a co-host. I just needed to shut up and start again. Anyway, it's Paul Hoppy, my co-host and partner in crime. Paul, how are we doing today?
Pretty good, yeah. I'm fine being a guest and a co-host. Like I could do that, right? Yeah.
I'm in hospitality. You're always sort of a guest, you know.
Exactly. I feel like I'm a guest everywhere on Earth, you know.
Sure. So yeah, how are we doing today?
Still good.
Uh-huh. You know what? Hold on a second. We're gonna start this
I don't have that much more. It's okay, sure.
No, it's fine. Keep rolling. We'll fix it in post. Yeah, Minnesota continues to be what it is. You know, we're still under invasion. I'm not. This last week we've had a sick kid and some sick parents, so I've not been paying as much attention to it as I would like, which is, it's kind of a weird reminder of privilege and of sort of my place in all this, is that this is all happening in my city. It's all happening very close to me, and I can be very upset about it and very locked into it and very involved with it. And I can also turn it off pretty easily, which is a nice thing, but also kind of a reminder of how easy that is and how easy that is to just take advantage of and just kind of forget. So yeah, it's been a kind of navel gazy week, but an interesting one.
Yeah. Being much further away, it's even easier to kind of turn everything off, as you know, I often have throughout my life intermittently, because I find thinking about all the things that I think are wrong with the world to be a crushing weight of misery, basically. So I think it's healthy to, when possible, sort of choose how you engage with the badness. I do. Obviously, you can't always choose that, right? Not everybody can choose that. And so appreciating that, I think, is important, obviously. But
yeah, I think so. I think for me, it's less about just the doom scrolling, because I think I'm definitely where you are. That just doesn't feel helpful unless I'm like actively learning things. It's more the, you know, in a lot of ways, I think it's really helped to be able to actively get involved and to be part of things that are making things better. But also realizing I can just mute that chat, you know, and then not get the notifications. And so yeah, it's important to do good things. It's also been interesting because I've recently started the Marvel Movie Minute, or the Marvel Movie Minute podcast that I'm involved with has just started our new section on Winter Soldier, which has been interesting, because I remember when that movie first came out and I thought I really like it, except the villain in it just seems so over the top. Like people declaring this many people enemies of the state and traitors, and therefore it's okay if law enforcement kills them. Like that's never going to happen in our country again.
Not in America.
Yeah, that's a movie that's aged well. That was a little ahead of its time in that way. So I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, that's maybe my favorite Marvel movie. Certainly one of them. And having said that, I'm getting kind of sick of winter itself. But
that's fair.
That's a separate question.
That's fair. Well, let's move into starting to talk about our writing. We're going to start trying to have a little bit more of an active format, and kind of, you know, we'll do introductions, do kind of updates on where we both are with writing, and then dive into some specific topics. What's your writing been like the last week?
Pretty much status quo, I guess, where I actually last week at the end, like on Friday, I had to get my thing out by 5, and I was 4:56, I think. You know, I was hammering the last keystrokes and clicking send / post. And it's interesting writing with a deadline, because I really don't like it, but I think I benefit from it.
Yeah.
Right. Where, you know, the same way having some sort of a schedule, I get a lot more done when I set a schedule for myself and I follow it. Or if somebody else sets a schedule for me, I hate that. Like right now, it's 10 in the morning here, I guess 9 there, right? 7 after. And we have a time scheduled because it is 2 people trying to do a thing together at the same time.
Right.
And it it has this like effect on me the night before into the morning, and it's something I want to do. And despite that, having it at a particular time is
Mm-hmm.
like, it's like upsetting on a certain level. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not suggesting we change that. Maybe we play around with the time, whatever. But like, just having a schedule set for me it's I don't like it. I never have, like, since being a pretty small child going to school.
Mm-hmm.
It was never the way I like to live. But I find when I do actually set out some sort of a schedule that I have some accountability for, where like I have to
Yeah.
show up at a particular time. Like for a while I was doing poker study every day at noon for like 6 months. I had
Mm-hmm.
a partner, we'd get online, noon, we'd go to like 5 p.m. Sometimes we'd only go to 2 or 3 p.m. And it was like we got so much done because it was just, you had to show up,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like that's what I've done for myself with writing. And I think as much as it doesn't feel good on its own, it is very productive.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people, whenever you read writing advice, I think a lot of it tends to be like, pick a time and
Yeah.
just every day at that time. It doesn't literally have to be every day. I've spoken to professional writers who are like, oh yeah, I don't write every day. It's just not
Yeah.
their thing. But, or it could be these days of the week or whatever, but it's just like, do it then. And when there's a publication deadline, it's like, you just you just have to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so it didn't feel like my best work necessarily, but I think it's good sometimes to get less than your best work out there. Otherwise, if you only ever publish your best work, you could only possibly ever publish one thing.
Yeah.
So, and you're never going to know whether something is going to be your best work. So it's like, oh, well, let's just keep writing, rewriting, whatever. And I think it's really healthy to sometimes just be like, okay, I'm putting this out there in the world,
No, I'm totally with you there. And I'm going to say a lot about the schedule stuff, but I want to just first say
Sure.
specifically on the writing, I'm at the exact opposite thing because I am trying to finish a product by the end of the year.
Yeah.
A product that I've promised to no one, that I have no one is sort of I have no contract, I have no sort of accountability in any way. And also because it's due literally 11 months from now, 10 and like 25th, whatever parts of a month from now, I don't have that at all. And I definitely find that I'm wrestling with that some. And yeah, I think I've never had it to the extent you do, I think, but I definitely get some level of that. I bristle at the idea of schedules and calendars, particularly when they feel, to me, it's two key things: when they feel arbitrary and when they feel like I had no power and no agency in picking them.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, I think, this wasn't, we were kind of, talking about it however many years ago we were in high school that we're not going to mention, but we now know by a lot more studies that like the teenage mind is not made to function at like from like 7 to 4 p.m. Like those are terrible hours for teenagers.
Yeah.
But that's what school is because it's built around, the adult work schedule and being able to work inside of that.
Yeah.
And really with one or two exceptions, most of my life I've set my own hours. And most of my life I've been able to say, but with the corollary of that, I would often have meetings and have to work on those schedules. And
right.
I like that in a lot of ways, but I find the less I have deadlines, the less I have specific things I have to do, the harder it is. And so, for example, I tell myself, you know what? I work from home. I have gym equipment in my house. I can just sit down and write. And then when I feel like I'm ready to take a break, I'll go work out. Never happens. Of course it never happens, So I'm now trying to build into a schedule of like, I wake up, I do my like kind of morning, like, brush my teeth, get cleaned up, get dressed, work out. We'll probably work out and then get cleaned up, but you know what I mean? Like
sure.
That kind of thing. I'm also now finding that having a baby means that my ability to completely schedule my day is a little bit out of control.
Yeah.
And it's a lot cuter than my high school principal was, but still just as much a dictator. But we're making it work. But yeah, but I think it's such an interesting thing. And I think it's one of the things that can make this really exciting project going forward for the two of us is that we are not only writing about different topics, but writing in such fundamentally different ways, whereas you have this like a weekly specific thing, and I have, just this big amorphous idea of a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, just
no, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say that I think having these kinds of really large goals can be extremely difficult, especially, and the answer to that, I think, is often to chop it up into smaller goals.
Yeah.
Right.
Very much
and so. When I was working on books with an editor for an indie publisher, I was behind schedule, but the schedule was ridiculous. And I'm pretty sure I wrote my first book in like 4 or 5 weeks, and the second book in a couple of months. And the second book was like 300 or 400 pages, and it was 50 small chapters. And having a scheduler is like, okay, I'll get you the next 5 chapters by the end of the week, kind of thing, right? And then I knew, and I would be working to do it and not necessarily hit that deadline, but because that deadline was there, I was still like, okay, tomorrow, okay, the next day, okay, here it is, and it wasn't a magazine, which I did ghostwrite some articles for magazine, which was just like, yeah, they got to get in on time, or they're not going to be in the issue, and you're not going to get paid, and so when it comes to like full length books, being able to break it down into smaller pieces, and then also maybe find some accountability, some sort of like delivery schedule for some of those. And obviously in the early goings, that's maybe less of a practical thing, because like you don't necessarily have an outline yet, right? You don't necessarily know what the 10 chapters or 20 chapters or 50 chapters are going to be, right? Or if you're Kurt Vonnegut, the like 176 chapters that are each like 2 paragraphs long.
Well, and that's what I've been able to do over the last couple of weeks. And so
it's
like in some way,
how's that going?
In some way, one of the reasons I want this podcast to happen is because this is going to be my first point of accountability. Because I want us to every week say, what have we done? And so that way I can look and say, okay, well, what did I do this last week? That may mean that I do most of my writing Wednesday night, because we record on Thursday morning. We'll see. But yeah, so what I've kind of been able to do in the last couple of weeks has been, one of the first things was exactly that. I have a software program I'm using. I'm going to see if it works. And if I like it, then I may kind of try to push it a little bit on here, maybe get some money for it. Who knows? But if I don't, I'll try something else. But it's one of those things where you can make a project, give it a due date, make sub projects, etc. And so I kind of mapped out the next 3 months in terms of like what I want to have done in the next 3 months. And a lot of that is, getting the table of contents really done, getting kind of summaries of different chapters I want to do. And getting a lot of like the research that I want to do mapped out. And that was the big thing I did this week, was kind of going through every episode that I've put out for this podcast. And next I'm going to do for Star Wars as well. And finding every episode that looks like we talked about something relevant and downloading it and getting it all saved into the right place. And then part of what I'm going to do this week, I've kind of set 2 goals for myself. One is to kind of like keep polishing the outline and have it, so it's not just like chapter titles, but a kind of like a couple sentences of, here's what I want to talk about in this chapter. Here's some of the characters I might draw in for it. But also, and it's kind of funny because this is so technical, but I think it's going to be really important. Take all of those episodes I have, feed them into software that will spit out a written transcript for me, and then start going through those and start reading those and start, using those for inspiration and being like, oh, cool, here's the thing I talked about that. Let me use that. Or, oh, hey, here's something that, one of my guests talked about. I should contact them and see, can I use this idea in their book, in the book that I'm doing. Partially, I think I'm going to do that just because it feels like good manners anyway. But one thing I realized I don't know about is like who has ownership of ideas when they're talked about on a podcast, in terms of like, if you said something and I have the verbatim quote because I can listen to it, can I just quote that in a podcast in my book, or do I have to like get your permission for that? Or it wasn't a public thing. I think I'm probably going to get people's permission anyway, because again, like it's just good manners, but I'm curious what the legal stuff is. So so it's like I've done very little actual writing, but it does feel like it's important steps towards making that happen.
You've done writing work, right?
Yeah.
Like the work around writing, which like editing isn't writing, proofreading isn't writing, but it is, right? It's part of the process. Like the actual like fingers to keys or voice to text part of the writing process for me could be like 10 to 20% of the whole time spent. Other times it could be 90 to 95, right? Where it's just, it just comes out. And then I just kind of like look it over. I'm like, yep, this looks fine. Boom, print. Right. But sometimes it depends on what the deadline looks like. But that, pre-production, I think is it's a big deal, and it can really set up how well, your final product or your final creation is gonna turn out. But also, like, I think it's important for anybody who wants to write to understand there's not like a right way, right? There's not one way that works for everybody. There's people often talk about like two general approaches, although that's maybe a little bit more fiction, but like there's infinite numbers of configurations of exactly how much you go by an outline. Like you can lay out, okay, these are the chapters I want, these are the dates I want to get them done. And you can go along and write and write and write. And as you're going along, you might have two chapters that you're like, yeah, these don't need to be two separate things, right? And then you kind of fold them into each other. And other times you might be like one of my, what was it, my third newsletter or something? One of them, I was writing this whole thing about results. And I was just like, this is boring. I was like it's important. I felt like I had written and said something that mattered and was going to be of use to some people and of interest to some people. But like, I didn't want that to be the main thing. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to break that out into its own post, or like kind of like a chapter in essence, and just put a link to it in the main post. And I think that was the right decision for me for that content at the time. And then I could write something that felt like it was more relevant to the primary audience, whatever that is. But, so sometimes like you're going to have a chapter and you're going to be like, yeah, maybe, I'm talking about this villain and that villain. And like, maybe I want to break them out into two different ones. Right. Or not. So being able to have a certain level of fluidity, even once you've set out that outline, some people are going to have more fluidity, some are going to have less, and some are just kind of pantsers who are just like, yeah, I'm just going to start writing and then I'm going to see how stuff fits together and do edits and stuff later. Thank you very much.
I think that's a great point. I have discovered the sound effects on here, so I'm having some fun with that. All right, well, we can keep going on updates for a while, but I know we want to do some deep dives. So into our first deep dive. Paul, take us away.
What's your why is maybe the title of a post that I'm about to write, which is basically around the concept that like when you want to do a thing, when you want to put a lot of time into doing a thing, particularly in this case, writing, but in my case also maybe poker or learning something on guitar or improving at chess or learning a language or whatever it is, like getting in touch with and even just explicitly setting out like why you want to do the thing, I think can be very valuable. It's not essential for everybody at all times, right? Like sometimes it's just apparent and you just want to do the thing. But if you want to do it over a long period of time, you want to create something and really finish it and get it out there into the world, whether you're self-publishing, whether you're looking for a publisher, whatever form that takes, really having an idea of like, why do I want to do this? I think is extremely helpful. And it doesn't have to be one reason, right? And I've jotted down some myself, but I'm wondering if you kind of have a clear idea, like what's your motivation?
Yeah, I think it's a really important one. And it's funny because, and I'm going to stick primarily to this discussion in terms of us as writers, but certainly in my book about, and my thinking about villains and why they, and what we can learn from them, I think a lot of the discussion becomes about why do villains do the things they do? And
Yeah.
that one way we look at villains is, the difference between someone who genuinely wants to make the world a better place for others, but is doing it in ways that the rest of us are like, that's really terrible, versus someone who their why is, ultimate power,
Right.
or the person. And I think honestly, where a lot of villains and a lot of heroes and just a lot of people fall somewhere in the middle is kind of a more personal why, but you convince yourself it's more of a generalized why. But in terms of for me as a writer, I think there is that, and I wanted to say all that specifically for that last part because I think that's what comes to mind for my question, because I have some what I think I could tell you are altruistic goals for it.
Mhm.
And I think I am serious about these in that I decided a long time ago that one of the best ways that I think I can sort of chip at the huge iceberg of problems in our world, and because I don't, in my 20s, I thought I personally could be the person who fixed everything. And that's a terrible way to think, and it leads to just making things a lot worse. I'm really a believer in like everybody should just pick up their ice pick and like, just chop away just a little bit. And it's funny, I hadn't thought when I picked the iceberg metaphor, I hadn't realized it was gonna be so anti-ice, but
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
appropriate.
I
Anyway,
saw it like that. It's like
but anyway, like I think what more the point is, so and I do think that the way that I can kind of give back is to say, hey, people, you're watching these kind of fun media, but probably they're making you think. I want to help you that. I want to give people some questions to think about. I want to give you some pathways to show here's how I think about it. Maybe it is. Because I do think that good things can come out of that. I do think that people can watch Luke help Vader find some goodness in him and come back away from the dark side. And that can, like, I've heard people talk about how that was inspirational to them in talking to, their parent or their sibling who had a drug problem. And like, they were worried, like, could they find something good in them again in, and so, yeah, so to me, that's kind of the thing. That's the altruistic goal. And that's what I tell myself. I think here, this is the way I want to give back in a little way along with the podcasting. But I'm not just altruistic,
Yeah.
I think it would be, I like podcasting and I want to build the platform, and putting a book out there might help to increase more listening to the podcast, and the podcast might help to increase the book. And like, I believe in synergy and like getting all those things rolling. And yes, again, that helps the message that I want to get out to the world, but also means I get more money, and money is good.
Yeah.
And, it also means that I get a little bit more notoriety and a little bit of, maybe people have heard, the name Matthew Fox and think, oh yeah, that person has some interesting ideas. I might want to talk to them. Like, that doesn't suck.
And they were great on Lost.
Yeah, exactly. It is funny to me that there are two other Matthew Foxes who are quite prominent. One, generally the actor, and then another who was an Episcopal priest who was basically doing exactly the theology that I wanted to do when I was in seminary. It was fun because I got to go up to him at one of his religious events and say, hi, I'm Matthew Fox, and see him do a double take.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's for a combination of all that. It's there's some movie or TV show, I forget what it is. It's probably been done a bunch of times, but where there's a person who's kind of explaining why they do the art they do, and they say, this is how I show up in the world. This is how I make myself a part of the world. And I think that's what really that's what podcasting is for me. And I think writing a book is trying to, it doesn't feel like something totally new. It feels like trying to take that, put it into a new medium that's a little bit more permanent, that's a little bit more accessible to a lot of people, that does have a potential to be a little bit more rewarding, and just kind of run with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot. I think embracing all of that is very healthy, because just because you may have some material benefit and that's a partial motive doesn't mean that the kind of like trying to create positive change isn't also a motive, right? I mean, there are points where there can be tension between those, where it can be like, well, do I want to try and make it a little more commercial and leave out certain, like, you're not going to be someone who's going to be like, oh, I'll just leave out this controversial thought because then it'll sell better, right?
Yeah.
that is the sort of thing that can happen. Having said that, things probably sell better with controversial thoughts, to be honest.
I
Right?
guess we're kind of in I think when I was first starting this podcast, I think there was a lot of pressure in that regard of like, there's a lot of people on all sides who care about comic books, don't scare off people of this persuasion or that persuasion. And I think I mostly tried to avoid that, but I probably settled into it to some extent. But I think now, at a time when the world is so overrun with clickbait and with genericness and with things that just feel insincere, people really want stuff that feels real, and I think I've pretty consciously decided, just trying to do something generic about a hero is just going to piss a lot of people off and be ignored by everybody else. And so it's a nice thing that the kind of moral idea that I've always wanted, it turns out, is what's more commercially profitable right now.
Yeah. If anything, I think the danger would be to try to lean farther into things that seem more extreme or shocking or whatever for the purpose, because I think you see this a lot. Honestly, I think a ton of right-wing political commentators like don't actually believe a word they say. They just know that it sells. I'm sure you've got that on the left as well. And you've got it in the middle too, but like, I guess that's the opposite. Like, it used to be mostly it was in the middle where people were trying to be like, well, this and that, and so we'll just sell you what's in the middle. And now it's like, especially on social media, independent media, I think there's a temptation to go like even farther, or like to have an extreme take for the sake of having an extreme take, as opposed to just like, this is my opinion. And it happens to be a take that a lot of people will find extreme, which I think is like, that's great.
And in a way, I do think, and this, not to get too much on a tangent, but we're going to go on a lot of tangents.
Spoilers.
But I do think that I do think there is that kind of, it's not extreme, but I think in the same way that there are people who will take an idea that has some backing, push it to the extreme without any evidence, so that they can make that point loudly and aggressively without nuance. I do think there's a lot of people in the center who will take a whole bunch of things on one side and one small example of something on the other side and say, look, both sides are just as equally bad.
Absolutely. And like, we're not actually going to weigh these against each other. We're just going to be like, oh, look, there's one and the other, like whatever. 97 versus 3%, even though those aren't the actual numbers. And I think also like writing something like that or publishing something often is, one of the big selling points to a lot of people is like building authority or whatever, which, I feel like you shouldn't have to do if you've recorded hundreds of podcasts on a subject. But at the same time, like some people just view the written word differently. Right. And partially because of sort of the permanence that you mentioned. But so I think it really, you do have a lot of synergy there when you can get those things kind of feeding into each other. Like, you can have your book for sale and people find it, and then they find out about the podcast, or they can listen to the podcast and find out about the book and then get the book. And I think that's very useful.
And I'll actually say, and I know you wanted to talk about how we find why, not just my why, but you asked me a question, so I'm running with it. I think there's another part of the why, and I from things you've said in the past, I think this is true of you as well, but don't let me put words in your mouth. I want to raise the level of conversation and kind of better educate people to have the kind of conversations I want. There's a lot of times where I find that, like, you and I have a rapport that is so good, I think, because we've been talking about these things for literally 30 years. And so, like, we've both heard ourselves talk about Vader so much that we kind of know we don't need to fill in all the gaps, Right. And so when I say, like, I want a villain who part of me agrees with, if I say that with no context whatsoever, it's very easy to take that completely out of context, and especially in places like Twitter or, other social media, where nuance goes to die and people just want quick sound bites, and for people just to make it very clearly a black and white issue. And I find that incredibly frustrating, and so, when people get into debates about, you know, like how do you separate just discussions of, the goals from the means and stuff like that, and because that's, I think that's an area that I look at villains a lot, where I look at like someone
Mhm.
like Killmonger and I say, I think his analysis of the problems of the world are completely right, but I don't agree with his methods. And then a lot of times, if I try to start that as a serious, nuanced conversation, I'll either get people saying, well, clearly you don't really agree with his analysis. You're just being,
Right.
racist or not caring enough about that. Or I get people saying, oh, no, you can't care about his analysis. The fact that he wants violence in these particular ways against, people who maybe I don't want to be violent against, or at least not in that way. And again, I'm deeply simplifying that. It's much more
Sure,
complicated,
sure, yeah.
but that means that all of that analysis should go out the window, and it's like, no, there should be some much more I want more nuanced conversations. I want more educated conversations. That sounds incredibly problematic. That's not what I don't mean that I can be the one to educate people, but that like there is people have been talking about ethics for thousands of years. You don't need to know all that, but like knowing that when I say knowing that when I use terms, they have a history and a knowledge to them, helping other people to learn those, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, when you said you didn't wanna put words into my mouth, I'll take the words you used and
Uh-huh.
explain why I agree with you, but not in those words.
Go for it. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that, like, I want to, like, raise the level of conversation, and I know those were just,
Uh-huh.
like, the words that you chose at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, I'll get more into, like, words and the exact things about words later, but I would say that the number one reason that I want to write usually is just I have ideas that I wanna share,
Yeah.
and, you know, there's something kind of inherently narcissistic about that, but, like, it's not I don't know, I don't feel like necessarily every idea I have is, like, important to share, but, like,
Yeah.
not even important, but just, like, if I think a thing and I see somebody else thinking something that I disagree with, it can be tempting to just engage directly and try and, like, argue with that viewpoint, which
Uh-huh.
I do plenty of, but rather than do that, like, when I see something that I disagree with, say, online or whatever, and then I have, like, my own thought, I feel like it's I wanna say healthier and more productive, but maybe just for me, it's more satisfying. Maybe it feels more
Yeah.
constructive to me to just express my viewpoint and just put it out in the world, and not so much like, "Hey, I'm trying to convince you of my viewpoint," but just like, "This is how I see it. I wanna explain to you how I see it, and then you can do with that what you will," you know?
Right.
And like, yeah, I think I have some perspective on some things that, you know, most people maybe don't. And I think sharing that can maybe help people either understand things in a better way, or even sometimes it's not about like, oh, well, the way I'm explaining it is better, but like, even if it could just get somebody to re-examine their own viewpoint and think
Yeah.
about their viewpoint, and maybe they come to a third point of view that's maybe more accurate or interesting or whatever than either of us were thinking in the first place. But like, yeah, I'd say the primary like reason that I want to write, like the number one thing is really just having some idea that I want to share. And sometimes that's a concept. It might be about poker, it might be about sort of philosophy or life
Uh-huh.
um or whatever. And it could be a story, right? It could be an
Yeah.
idea for a story that I'm like, oh, I think this would be a cool idea for a story. And like, well, the most straightforward way of doing something with that is to just write the story, and
Yeah.
then put it out there in the world. Some of them I'm like, well, maybe somebody else could write this story, and
Right.
like if anybody wants this idea, go ahead, take it. Um, but generally for me, those are like the main things is like I have some idea that I want to express and make clear, and then allow other people to have their own thoughts about,
Mm-hmm.
or a story that I want to tell, and then people can enjoy it, not enjoy it, whatever, experience it, and then kind of do with that what they will, essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I definitely don't think there's anything narcissistic about that. To me, like, yeah, we have ideas, we want to share them. And, you know, the desire to put something out there that people can then choose to take. It's when it becomes, hey, everyone, you have to listen to me.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean just in kind of like, power ways that get violent, but just, like if I start going to every dinner party I go to and say, wait, no, you got to talk about my ideas about villains right now. Like that's when it becomes a little problematic, but just putting something out there. And I also want to say one thing that's kind of inspired me about this, and I want to put a pin in it and say this is, I think, what's going to be our deep dive next week, so that it doesn't become our deep dive now.
Sure. Yeah.
Feel free to respond to it, then I might co-respond, and then we're done.
Sure.
But it's making me realize that I think one of the things that I find most intimidating about writing, and particularly then publishing, is the permanence of it. Because take what just happened with our discussion of Killmonger. Like I think trying to find the nuanced middle ground that I'm talking about in terms of how I view Killmonger is deeply complicated, is very easily misunderstood. And I want to name something. I, as a white person talking about a black person's struggle with racism in the world, I think adds a further level of complexity that I need to be aware of and sensitive of. And I'm comfortable saying it in a podcast because I think like people hear me stumbling. People hear me searching for the right words. And even acknowledging then, and I'm repeating now, that even though I was saying it, I was like, I don't think that's quite white. I'm still wrestling for the best way to say it. I can't put that in a book.
Right.
Once I put it in a book, I've said, these are the final words, at least for right now. And someone's going to read that and go, this is what Matthew thinks. And therefore, this is how I can attack Matthew, which is something I've had some bad experience with in both personal and professional ways. And I'm not really eager to jump back into. It shouldn't stop me, and I certainly want to be very open both now and in my writing to critique and feedback, and I want to hear it, but it's scary. And I think that's definitely something that I'm realizing is one of the things that stopped me from writing more, is that sense of the permanence of it,
Yeah. I won't dig into that too deeply because that is a great subject, the sort of kind of fear of permanence in a way, right? Or the potential for that. I do think also often we're discouraged from using qualifiers in language when particularly in the written language, like, well, your writing will have more of an effect if you remove this word that expresses a level of uncertainty. I have like Microsoft Word constantly suggesting things like that. I'm like, no. The uncertainty is critical to what I'm expressing, right? If I were to express certainty here, I'd be lying. I'd be deceiving the reader. And, but it's also true that your words will likely land harder if you lie a little bit and you weed out some of that uncertainty. So I think finding artful ways of communicating that, I find it very challenging. I think it's a worthwhile challenge. I think it's really interesting. I actually remember when I was writing one of my books with Dusty, it's a poker book, and we were co-writing it. He was the main the person delivering strategic content, and I was trying to put it in words and, make sure that the mathed and stuff. And the original way he'd explained a bunch of hands had this just tremendous amount of certainty. And we actually went back in and injected a whole bunch of qualifiers that kind of, you could say, weakened the language, but made it more accurate because it's poker. Poker's a game of imperfect information, right?
Right.
Where there are spots where people say, oh, they never have the nuts. They never have this. They always do this, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you don't know that. You can't know that. And as a result, like, you need a certain level of those qualifiers. And so I think actually including those in language, I think it's important and challenging and can sometimes work against you in terms of having the effect you want, but you'll be more accurate. And that can be a bit of a struggle sometimes, I think.
And I think it's very true. And I think earlier when we were talking about, the temptation to go to extremes, my thought about all of that is a kind of phrase that often comes to mind is, it's hard to put nuance on a bumper sticker, to make things nice and pithy. And yet I think that there's a real problem with that. And I think this may also be something I think that shifts and changes over time. I certainly think that right now in this world where so many people are trying to express things in 140 characters, 280 characters, a 15-second soundbite on TikTok or YouTube Shorts or something, that really encourages a lack of nuance. And yeah, maybe that's something we're both going to talk about in our writing. Is that part of what I want to do is at least, and sounds like something for you as well, is get some more nuance, get some more not vagueness, it's the opposite of that, but get some more detail and perspective and uncertainty into these conversations, because I do think that in the end it kind of goes back to what we were saying before about how people talk about writing. Like, if someone says, pay me $30 and I will tell you exactly how to write the perfect novel, and someone else says, pay me $30 and I'll walk you through my process and help you find your process, and there is no right way to write a novel, but maybe you'll find your right way, that second person is almost certainly going to be a better help to people.
Yeah.
And going to also get far less customers than the first one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. Yeah. One thing that just sprung to mind is like, I actually think like nuance is increased specificity, right? But like that people don't want, because it feels like it introduces a certain level of uncertainty sometimes. And like humans' life existence is just like swathed in uncertainty. And I think people try as hard as possible to kind of insulate ourselves from it, I guess.
I mean, I've learned more about poker from you than from any other source. And I'm very well aware that I'm an incredibly frustrating student, because I know that like a lot of times I will say like, okay, I've got a pair of sevens and there's a king on the board. What should I do?
Right.
And you're like, okay, well, what about this? And what, and you're asking what I've eventually come to learn are all very specific, important questions that allow you to give me a much more specific answer to the much more specific situation. But what it sounds to me like you're saying is, well, is your opponent wearing a green shirt or a blue jacket? Because I'm like, who cares? It's sevens and it's a king. I just want to know what to do every single time I have a pair of sevens and there's a king on the board.
Yeah, yeah.
And at the end of the day, your answer is there's no such answer, because it does. And in the same way, I think, you know, if one of the best ethics lessons I ever got, and this is kind of the most extreme, but I think it was so helpful, because again, it's that question of like, if someone just says like, okay, well, is someone a villain or a hero if they do this? The fact is the specificity matters. And what my ethics professor in grad school said as kind of experiment was, if I take a knife and cut your body, is that wrong?
Right.
And most of us weren't thinking about it. And they were like, well, yeah, of course. And they're like, what if I'm cutting it so I can get out an infected appendix?
Right.
And we're all like, oh, okay, fine. Yeah. Fine. But like, it's a great example of like, you know, you're not supposed to cut people's bodies open, except sometimes you are. You know,
right? What if I knock you out and then do things to your body? It's like,
yeah, right.
That
and then
sounds horrible.
And then demand a whole bunch of money from you.
Exactly.
And you're gonna be like, actually, the money part's the only unethical part.
And you're gonna wake up and your throat's gonna be sore, and you'll be like, what the?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's just, the specificity is important, but it's a lot harder, and particularly because editing is important, you know. And I remember when Twitter first came out, I hated the idea of it, because I'm always like, why say it in one sentence when you could say it in three? And you actually kind of changed my mind on that somewhat, because I think you pointed out correctly that yes, it's a problem to just find 4 words that don't really mean anything but sound good. But yes, it's also a problem to say the same thing in 40 pages. And being able to capture the nuance of something in a very short, time, character limit or page limit is really hard and a good skill to learn. And I think it's going to be part of what we're talking about a lot in this podcast.
Yeah, there's a famous writing quote that I will probably quote and requote, something along the lines of, apologies for having written you a 5-page letter. I didn't have the time to write you a 1-page letter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll just take that to pivot into kind of my list of reasons I write that I won't dig deep into them. But one of them is I actually enjoy the process of writing. Like once I'm writing, I enjoy writing, and I enjoy rewriting and playing with words and being like, is there a better way to say this? And I think one pitfall can be, while writing a first draft, to keep going back and try and be like, oh, did I say this exactly right? It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, just say it how you say it, and then go back. You know, there's a saying, rewriting is rewriting, or whatever, essentially. And I think there's like especially true in like in cinema or TV or whatever, but like being able to go back and be like, oh, can I tweak this a little way? And that's why Twitter was always kind of interesting to me, because I was like, well, okay, if I have something that I want to spend 200 characters on, like, can I say the same thing in fewer characters? You know, can I say, it's like, you know, there's a Hemingway story. I don't know if this is apocryphal or if this actually happened, but I think this was at the, you know, the Algonquin round table or whatever. And maybe Dorothy Parker or someone else was like, can you write a story in 6 words? You know, he wrote on a napkin, for sale, baby shoes, never worn.
Oh yeah.
And it's like a heartbreaking story. It's 6 letters, 6 words long. It's like, oh man.
The first time I saw that, I teared up, and I was just like, it's so powerful.
I mean, I'm reading this story or reciting this story to a new parent, right? So I'm sure it's even more, you know, but it's like, yeah, it's sometimes less is more, sometimes more is more, right? And figuring out which is which, to me is some of the fun sometimes. Is just figuring out how I want to say something, and just like saying it first, having an idea, saying it from inspiration, and then being able to come back and be like, perform surgery on it, essentially, you know.
Well, and here's where I'm going to be obnoxious, because that 6 words is so beautiful and so perfect and conveys something so powerfully that isn't necessarily true. And
right, exactly.
Quite literally. We were given some baby shoes when our baby was born. Our baby's feet never touched the ground. Like, right. I think we may have a pair of baby shoes that we probably will give to someone else or possibly sell that were never worn. Certainly,
you have to advertise them that way.
Certainly, someone gave us a sweater, I know, that was for a 0 to 3 month old baby. That was a thick, heavy winter sweater. Our baby was born in July.
Right.
So by the time it got cold enough to wear the sweater, the kid was never going to wear the sweater. And that's just a fun, and I feel like that's both important, but that's also a nitpick, because yes, there are ways that a person could sell baby shoes that don't mean the thing the story is implying, that the baby died or was miscarried or whatever it was.
Yeah, whatever it was. Yeah.
But still, it's a powerful story, you know.
Right.
And that it's okay to be okay saying, here's what's implied. It's not 100% assumed, but the implication's enough to be a powerful story.
Exactly. And I mean, I even think actually adding that perspective adds to the story. Like, and it kind of tells us something about fiction, that like, yeah, you could decide. If you're like, yeah, I don't want a dead baby in my story, then you can just be like, whatever, that's what happened, you know. And this is like a misdirection. And I mean, misdirection in stories happens all the time, right? Deliberately often. I mean, how many fake deaths are in Lord of the Rings? Spoilers for nobody dying until somebody dies.
Less than there are hobbits jumping on beds, but yes, quite a lot.
There's a lot of hobbits jumping on beds. That's true.
All right. Well, we were going to do some updates, but I do think this is a good point to wrap up, and we can kind of do that later. Do that next time. Any of the last things you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just also wanted to like co-sign, you know, I would also like to make money from writing, you know. And it more than just like making some money. Like I do envision within like 5 years or so having writing and or other kind of content stuff being my primary source of income. And the thing that I think is so appealing about writing to a lot of people is like you really only need your mind and then a way of capturing your thoughts and putting them out into the world, right? Like I think it was Earl Stanley Gardner who didn't even write things down, just dictated it, you know, dozens of novels, you know. And I mean, there have been blind people who are writers, right? There's you can be deaf and you can write. Like there's almost nothing. Like you could even be the guy in the video for one, and you could like actually write a book if you wanted, you know. And so it's just being able to, like, as long as you have a language, like you can communicate ideas. And if you find a way to be commercially successful enough, like you can have a living that you can live on really basically anywhere and not be kind of bound to any schedule.
Good luck.
Yeah. And so that's
yeah, and I think that's another good topic to put a pin in, because I do think that we are in a point in time where excessive wealth hoarding is a huge problem, and therefore people are deeply suspicious of anyone who's desiring to do anything for the accumulation of wealth. And I think that there is some good reason for that. But I think sometimes that can become a sort of like, we all have to take a vow of poverty, and like, as long as you're putting a roof over your head and, you know, bread and water on your plate, then you should be making enough money. And like, you know, it's there's, to me, a world of difference between the wealth hoarding versus desiring comfort or desire. But there is, you know, but there, here again, I don't know the exact words, because there is degrees and stuff. And
yeah, that definitely,
let's have a 40-minute discussion about it, because I can't.
One that deserves a pin for sure. Yeah. I mean, I actually have thoughts about writer billionaires or whatever, and we could get into that at some point. Unfortunately, the only example that comes to mind kind of like took a big old dump on my thought there. But the last coherent thought that I'll express is that there is one thing that I've heard from a number of people. I'm sure there's like a famous quote of this, but I've heard this from individuals as well, that basically one kind of pitfall of like wanting to be a writer is like the idea of like, I wanted to be a writer more than I actually wanted to write. Which think that can be problematic and basically lead to being not a writer, you know, or being a miserable writer, I guess, are kind of the two options there. So I think generally having some sort of drive beyond just having done the thing, I think is very helpful and constructive. And then that doesn't mean you can't have, you know, the other sort of wanting to be like, yes, I've published a novel, you know, kind of stuff as well. Like, that's fine, to each their own. Yeah.
And I think you want to be a writer more than I do. I want to be someone who shares ideas, with writing being one way I do that, you know?
And I feel like actually I didn't even get into the main thing, which is like, why do you want to write doesn't mean why do you want to be a writer, right? I mean, if you write something, like you are a writer, right? But like, it doesn't mean you have to want to be a professional writer, right? It doesn't mean you have to want to make money from it or sell books or whatever. Like, you've come up with your own reasons, whatever they are. They're good reasons if that's your reasons.
I mean, one of the ironies to me of all of this is that I have a number of friends who are professional writers, and they went to school and they got degrees in creative writing or other kind of, you know, writing type things, and all wanted to sit and write their novels and things like that. And many of them are working on stuff like that, and many of them have had some success with stuff like that. But they're getting paid to write copy for ads, or for, you know, one is doing clickbait stuff that I know they hate, and someone else is doing you know, stuff that they feel like is at least more help. You know, they're writing you know, copy
like grants
for like nonprofit stuff, you know, for a medical thing. That is important work, but it's not like what feeds them in the way they want. You know, it's funny. I think we say like, oh, are you a writer? We're thinking of the person who is, you know, setting their own schedule, sitting at their typewriter, or their pad, or their computer, or whatever. The reality is there's probably the overwhelming majority of people whose profession is writer are writing for, you know, paid things in specific ways.
Copywriters or technical writers or some kind of writing that's not creative writing.
Right.
You know? My literary agent, I asked my literary agent what type of writing pays the best. Ransom notes. From Get Shorty.
I like it. I
always liked it.
Like any good laugh track, there's a few seconds behind. All right. I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much. Paul, where is your blog? Where can people find it?
Zenmadman.com is maybe /blog is more direct, but that's and then you can find various things published under Paul Christopher Hoppy on Mostly on Amazon, sadly, as they just own the planet. But
Yeah.
It's really the easiest way to publish things yourself. And some on LeanPub too, I think, are still there. So
I remember that site.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm the Ethical Panda. If you search for theethicalpanda.com, you'll find all the podcasts I've done. And if you look in those, you'll get to see lists of my guests. Paul Christopher Hoppe is one. Paul's been a co-host and a guest, and been on a number of the episodes we've done. Check all those out. On behalf of myself, Paul, thank you all so much for listening. Fuck ICE.
Yeah, just abolish that shit.
Melt it.
Just to melt.